Welcome to the world behind midnight, the channel where the darkest truths come crawling out of the silence. Tonight's story is one that was never meant to be told. I've buried 3 teammates in the line of duty. I've survived things that would shatter most people. But nothing prepared me for what we pulled out of those woods. And what came looking for us afterward. My name isn't important. Call me Decker. I spent 11 years as a Navy SEAL, operating in theaters that never made the evening news. Black sites, ghost missions, the kind of work that gets filed under a code name and buried so deep even the Freedom of Information Act can't touch it. The most dangerous things I ever encountered weren't armed combatants, or IEDs, or hostile foreign intelligence. They were something else entirely. Something the mission briefs described only as a non-human biological asset of extreme strategic interest. The operation began on a Thursday in late autumn, roughly 2 years ago. I was contacted through a back channel by a former commanding officer, a man I'll call Hargrove, who was running a classified interagency unit that operated entirely outside the standard chain of command. His group handled what the official world refuses to acknowledge: anomalies, entities, things that keep turning up in wilderness reports and classified acoustic databases, leaving traces that no known animal can explain. He needed a foreman team he could trust completely. He needed men who wouldn't ask too many questions. I said yes. My team consisted of 3 people I knew from previous deployments. Jason Atkinson, a former Delta operator who now specialized in signals intelligence and electronic surveillance. Chandler Davidson, a British-trained reconnaissance expert who had spent years tracking insurgents through mountain terrain, the best tracker I'd ever served with. And Alejandro Morrow, a former Marine Force recon combat medic, certified in heavy tranquilizer protocols used for wildlife capture operations. We were all experienced, we were all skeptical, and we were all willing to ignore that skepticism for the kind of money Hargrove was offering. The target coordinates placed us deep in the Pacific Northwest, a stretch of ancient forest so thick and uncharted that satellite imagery came back as nothing but an unbroken green mass. No trails, no roads, no infrastructure. The mission objective, as stated in the brief, was to locate, immobilize, and extract a living specimen of what the documentation called a Class 7 cryptid, a bipedal primate of significant size demonstrating behavior consistent with advanced tool use, social structure, and tactical awareness. In plain language, they wanted us to go out into that wilderness and capture a Bigfoot. I'll be honest. My first instinct was to laugh. My second instinct, after reading the supporting documentation, the acoustic signatures, the soil pressure analysis, the satellite thermal data, was to stop laughing immediately. The pre-mission briefing included 37 separate incident reports from military and forestry personnel going back nearly 4 decades. Whatever was out there in those woods, the people upstairs had been tracking it for a long time, and they'd never gotten close enough to touch it. That was what we were for. We inserted via Blackhawk, under a pre-dawn fog so heavy it felt like flying through cotton. The drop was clean, and the moment our boots touched the forest floor, the silence hit us. Not the natural silence of the wilderness. Something deeper. Something wrong. Chandler immediately signaled the rest of us. No birds. Not even insects. That kind of absolute hush, he told us later, usually means one thing in the wild. Something large and dangerous is nearby, and everything else already knows it. We set up our perimeter, activated our comms kit, and began the first patrol. The trees around us were enormous, ancient, draped in moss, beautiful, and entirely, completely hostile. The first 3 days were methodical, wide arc reconnaissance, mapping the terrain, establishing observation points. On the morning of day 2, Chandler brought us to a creek bed that changed the tone of the entire mission. There, pressed deep into the clay bank, were footprints. Enormous, elongated, impossibly deep, 18 inches from heel to toe. 5 distinct digit impressions, widespread, gripping the earth the way a hand grips a branch. The stride interval was staggering, nearly 6 feet between prints, perfectly level, no deviation in pressure. Whatever made those tracks wasn't running or scrambling. It was walking, calmly, deliberately, as if it owned every inch of that ground. The weight implied by the print depth was somewhere between 600 and 700 pounds. Chandler crouched over them for a long time without speaking. When he finally stood and looked at me, his expression wasn't the face of a man who had found interesting animal sign. It was the face of a man who had just recalibrated something fundamental in his understanding of the world. We kept moving. We didn't talk about the tracks again, but all four of us knew the truth. The briefing hadn't been exaggerated. Whatever they wanted us to bring back was real, and it was close. On the third night, it announced itself. We had set up a tight camp in a natural clearing, motion sensors deployed in a wide ring around the perimeter. Around midnight, Jason's acoustic monitoring console began registering a series of rhythmic percussive strikes, deep, resonant thumping sounds coming from the surrounding forest. Not random, not the sound of a branch falling or an animal moving through underbrush. Rhythmic, patterned, thump, pause, thump, thump, pause. 3 beats, 2 beats, cycling and shifting in direction. It was communication. Deliberate, structured communication happening in the darkness, less than 100 meters from where we sat holding our rifles. We moved to defensive positions immediately. Lights on, weapons up, scanning the blackness beyond our sensor ring. The thumping stopped the instant we moved, then resumed seconds later from a completely different direction, closer now, but still invisible. It knew where we were. It knew our light range. It was staying just beyond it, moving in arcs we couldn't predict. Always in our peripheral awareness, but never in our direct line of sight. Chandler whispered something I've never forgotten. It's not trying to intimidate us randomly. It's learning our reaction patterns. We were being studied. In the middle of that forest, in the dead of night, something was running behavioral analysis on us. Then the thumping stopped entirely, replaced by something that sent a cold wire of fear straight down my spine. Breathing, heavy, slow, measured, not from one direction, from multiple. The sound of massive lungs drawing air with absolute calm at the very edge of our camp. At least 2 distinct respiratory rhythms, cycling slowly, unhurried. They were so close we should have been able to see them, but there was nothing in the darkness except shadows and the soft green glow of Jason's console. They stood there in the dark and breathed, and we sat in our little ring of light, and for 30 minutes, nothing happened at all. That was somehow more terrifying than any attack could have been. The next morning confirmed what the night had only implied. Surrounding our camp in the soft earth were prints. Dozens of them, overlapping, circling, approaching, and retreating. 2 distinct size profiles. One set led directly to the entrance of Chandler's tent and stopped. A perfect heel-to-toe impression in the mud, less than 8 inches from where his head had rested while he slept. Nothing taken, nothing damaged, no aggression, just a message delivered with absolute precision. We were here, we watched you sleep, and we chose to leave you undisturbed. Not because they couldn't have acted, because they decided not to. We were the intruders, and they were showing us exactly how thoroughly they understood that. Hargrove's directive came back through the satellite burst channel 3 hours later. Capture protocol remained priority 1. Proceed deeper, find the main shelter site. We packed light, shed everything non-essential, and followed the trail. Chandler had been quietly piecing together a network of prints. Disturbed vegetation, and deliberately bent branches that formed a path no map had ever recorded. Alejandra walked in silence beside me, her tranquilizer rifle slung across her back, her eyes scanning the canopy. She had stopped making jokes on day 2. None of us had. The deeper we moved into the territory, the more the forest seemed to actively resist us. The undergrowth thickened. The terrain shifted constantly, sheer rock faces giving way to soft, boggy ground without warning. Massive fallen trees blocking direct routes and forcing us into narrow corridors between dense stands of old-growth pine. It felt less like navigating terrain and more like being funneled, as if the landscape itself had been quietly shaped over centuries to disorient intruders. Chandler kept a compass in his hand at all times. The magnetic readings were inconsistent. Neither of us discussed why. We found their structures in a shallow valley on the afternoon of the 4th day. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say structures, because the word matters. These were not random debris or fallen branches piled by chance. They were constructed. Massive limbs, some 8 inches in diameter, had been bent and interlocked while still living, forced into arching forms, and held in place by the natural tension of the wood. Crossbeams woven through upright supports, overhead canopy deliberately layered to shed rain. We stood at the edge of that valley and stared, and nobody spoke for a full minute. There was a cleared space at the center of the valley, where flat river stones had been arranged in a pattern, not a random scatter, a precise spiral, starting from a single central stone and radiating outward in a clean geometric arc. Alejandra knelt beside it and photographed it from every angle. She looked up at me with the expression of someone who has just had a deeply held assumption quietly dismantled. "This isn't an animal," she said. "These are people." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. None of us had any answer to offer. We took our photos and kept moving, because the mission clock didn't stop for philosophy. The lava tube entrance was exactly where the classified addendum had indicated, hidden behind a wall of ancient rhododendron, presenting as nothing more than a vertical crack in the basalt face. But the ground in front of it told a different story. The prints here were dense and varied. Multiple size profiles, adult males, judging by depth and span. Smaller impressions alongside them, juveniles. A family group, just as the intelligence had suggested. The air at the fissure entrance was heavy with a thick, musky scent, unlike any animal I had encountered. Rich and dark, like old earth and something electric. The smell of a home. We were standing at the front door. We moved fast. Jason deployed the capture system, a Kevlar-reinforced net anchored into the rock with titanium spikes, triggered by a compressed air charge, integrated with a high-frequency sonic disorientation pulse. Alejandra and I took elevated positions on the outcrop above the entrance. Tranquilizer rifles ready, darts loaded with a compound powerful enough to bring down a large rhinoceros. Chandler took the net trigger. Jason handled communications and perimeter sensors. We laid a synthetic scent lure just inside the fissure. Then we waited. The waiting was 47 minutes of complete silence. My heartbeat was audible in my own ears. The forest around us had gone absolutely still again, that deep, wrong silence that we now recognized as a warning sign. And then we heard it. From deep inside the tube, moving slowly toward the entrance, a sound like stone clicking against stone, a low rhythmic vocalization, and beneath it, the slow, deliberate respiration we had heard circling our camp 3 nights before. It was coming out. The figure that stepped through the fissure entrance into the last gray light of the afternoon was the largest living thing I have ever stood in proximity to. Easily 9 feet in height, a mass of dark brown hair over a frame engineered for pure functional power, shoulders 3 feet across, arms that hung past the knee, hands that could have wrapped around a man's skull with room to spare. Its face was broad and flat, with a pronounced brow ridge that cast deep shadow over eyes that were dark, clear, and absolutely, unmistakably aware. It stood at the entrance and scanned the tree line with the measured patience of a sentry. A warrior checking his perimeter. It knew something was wrong. I gave the signal. Chandler triggered the net. The compressed air charge fired with a hollow crack, and the Kevlar mesh exploded outward, enveloping the massive figure completely. The sonic pulse fired simultaneously. What happened next is burned into my memory with the clarity of a photograph. The creature let out a sound that had no business coming from any throat I had previously believed capable of producing it. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't animal panic. It was something between a scream and a word, full of specific, targeted fury, full of comprehension. It knew exactly what was happening. It understood it was a trap. And the sound it made was the sound of profound, intelligent outrage. Alejandra and I fired simultaneously. 2 darts, chest and left shoulder. The creature thrashed against the net with a force that drove the anchor spikes visibly deeper into the rock. The Kevlar strained. For a terrible 60 seconds, It seemed like the creature might actually tear itself free through sheer will alone. Then the sedative compound began to work. The movements slowed. The vocalizations dropped in pitch and volume, from fury to something low and agonized. The massive frame settled, slow as a falling tree, until it lay contained in the net, breathing hard but no longer fighting. Its eyes were still open, still tracking us, still entirely, horribly conscious beneath the sedation. We had approximately 10 minutes before the family group responded. We secured the asset with titanium alloy restraints while Alejandra began her preliminary assessment. The creature's hands were extraordinary up close, enormous. But the thumbs were clearly opposable, the fingers bearing calluses and patterns consistent with tool use and deliberate grip. It was breathing steadily. Its eyes followed each of us in turn, tracking our positions with sluggish but unmistakable intentality. That gaze full of something ancient and terrible and deeply, specifically personal, was the first thing that made me feel something other than adrenaline. It made me feel ashamed. The forest answered before we could begin the extraction hoist. The call started from the east, that same rhythmic, multitonal vocalization pattern, but now stripped of any patience. Raw and jagged. 2 voices, then 3, then more. Chandler called in the emergency extraction coordinates on the satellite burst channel. His voice professionally flat in a way that meant he was burning through his composure at an alarming rate. The response confirmed a Blackhawk would attempt a clearing landing 45 minutes out. 45 minutes. The footsteps in the undergrowth were already audible, heavy, fast, coordinated. They were cutting off our most direct escape route before we had even begun to move. The first stone hit the tree beside Chandler's head with a crack like a rifle shot, then another. Then a sustained barrage from multiple angles. Enormous rocks, some the size of a human torso, hurled with terrifying accuracy and force. They weren't throwing randomly. They were targeting our active positions with precision, using the sound of our movement to track our locations, adjusting aim between throws. Jason went down briefly when a stone clipped his shoulder. Alejandra dragged him behind the rock outcrop and kept working on the asset. We returned fire into the canopy live rounds, suppressive fire, designed only to create noise and light. It bought us seconds, not minutes. We abandoned the hoist rig and used the emergency sled, a collapsible frame designed for exactly this kind of rapid forced extraction. Rigging a 700-pound sedated body onto that sled while stones rained down and the sound of something enormous moved through dense undergrowth 20 meters away is not something I can fully describe. It operated outside the edges of what training prepares you for. Everything was pure reflex. Pure trained muscle memory in a situation the training had never fully anticipated. Chandler took the front of the sled. I took the rear. Jason, one arm functional, ran point. Alejandra handled the asset's medical status and the rear perimeter simultaneously. They moved with us. That was the thing I could not process rationally in the moment and cannot process any better now. They stayed with us through 2 miles of brutal terrain, sheer slopes, downed timber, boggy ground, maintaining a parallel course in the dense undergrowth, always just out of direct sight, always audible. The vocalizations cycled through phases, coordinated patterns that clearly functioned as positional signals, periods of absolute silence that were worse than the noise because they meant something was changing in the tactical picture, and underneath it all, something that sounded, with unbearable clarity, like grief, not rage, grief. The sound of someone who has lost something irreplaceable and is being forced to watch it go. Alejandra injected the asset at 15-minute intervals, the minimum effective cycle to maintain sedation. Between doses, the creature would begin to stir, eyes opening, that slow, terrible awareness returning, head turning to locate its family by their calls. Once, during a 30-second window when Alejandra was dealing with a compromised syringe, the asset's hand closed around a piece of fallen branch beside the sled. Not a reflex, a deliberate reach. It had identified a potential tool, even in its sedated state. She got the injection in before the asset could act, but that gesture stayed with me. Even chemically suppressed, something in that mind was still working, still looking for options, still refusing to surrender. We broke out of the tree line and into the fire-scarred clearing with 7 minutes to spare. The Black Hawk was already audible, descending through the gray overcast. We got the asset onto the landing mark, secured the restraint lines to the hoist, and Chandler started talking the pilot, and my lungs were empty of everything except the need to keep moving. Then Jason touched my arm and pointed toward the tree line. I turned. They were standing at the edge of the clearing. Not hidden, not threatening, just there, in the open, watching. 7 of them, varying heights, varying ages by size, standing in a loose group at the boundary between forest and open ground. The largest among them, a female by physical proportion, stood at the front. Her eyes were fixed on the sedated form strapped to the extraction rig. The sound she made was very quiet, low, a single sustained vocalization with no aggression in it at all, only loss, only the specific, terrible register of a mind that fully understands what it is witnessing and has no mechanism to prevent it. I looked at her, and I looked at what we were loading onto that helicopter, and for a single moment, the entire framework of the mission went completely silent in my head. We lifted off. I watched the clearing drop away below us, and I watched that group of figures at the tree line grow smaller, and then disappear into the green. The asset lay restrained beside me, breathing slowly, its eyes open and tracking the movement of the helicopter with sluggish awareness. At some point during the flight, those eyes found mine, and the expression in them, not animal fear, not blind instinct, but the measured, clear-eyed gaze of someone taking a thorough inventory of the face of the person responsible for this. That expression has not left me for a single day since. The debrief was conducted in a facility I cannot locate on any map I have been shown since. Sterile corridors, fluorescent lighting, people in white coats with ID badges that showed only numbers. The asset was transferred to a containment unit designed to hold something of its physical capacity. We signed non-disclosure agreements so comprehensive they covered every conceivable form of communication. We received our payments. We were thanked for our service. And then we were released back into the normal world, as if we had simply been away on a hiking trip. Jason left within 2 months, citing what he described as an inability to reconcile the operation with his existing framework of ethics. Chandler simply vanished. No forwarding address, no contact of any kind. I spent 12 weeks in a low-profile assignment in the desert Southwest, convincing myself the distance in the open space would be enough to break the feeling of exposure. It was not. Alejandra and I spoke once, briefly, 3 months after extraction. Neither of us said anything that approached what we were actually thinking. We agreed the money was sufficient. We agreed the mission had been completed as ordered. We said goodbye. I haven't heard from her since. The package arrived on an unremarkable Tuesday morning. No return address. My name typed on the exterior label, with no additional information. Inside, resting on a bed of dry moss harvested from the Pacific Northwest, I recognized the specific species was a single smooth river stone, and around it, arranged in a perfect geometric spiral, were 4 smaller stones, one for each of us. They had found us. Not just me, all of us. They had tracked 4 individuals through the full complexity of the modern world, and delivered this object to my specific location, as a declaration, not a threat, something colder than a threat. An acknowledgement. You took something from us. We know where you are. We are patient. I relocated 3 times in the following year. Each time, within weeks, something changed in my environment that had no rational explanation. Deep, parallel gouges in the concrete exterior of my second apartment at a height no human hand could comfortably reach. A sound outside my third location late one night, 4 floors up, that could not have been any animal native to that environment. A single strand of dark, coarse hair left on the railing of my exterior staircase, long as my forearm, unlike any hair cataloged in any database I was able to access. They were not attacking me. They were maintaining contact, ensuring I understood that the distance I was putting between us was not the distance they recognized. I left the service entirely 18 months after the operation. I stripped my digital footprint as completely as I know how to strip it, which given my background is considerably more completely than most people can manage. I moved to a remote coastal location, granite cliffs, salt water, a geography that should present significant logistical challenges to a creature adapted to inland forest. I told myself the ocean was a barrier nothing could cross. I told myself that for 6 weeks. Then I found the stone, wedged into the dock hardware at the end of my private pier, placed with unmistakable intention, wrapped in a braid of dark hair, and a single piece of Pacific Northwest moss that had somehow survived the crossing, alive. No note was needed. I understand now what the operation actually accomplished. It did not advance science. It did not improve national security. What it accomplished was this. It introduced the most capable tracking intelligence I have ever encountered, more sophisticated in its methods than any human counterintelligence operation. I was trained to resist, to 4 specific human faces, and 4 specific human scent profiles. It gave that intelligence a personal stake in our location, and it confirmed for them, beyond any remaining doubt, that the boundary between their world and ours is one that humans are willing to violate without hesitation when the incentive is sufficient. They are not a myth. They are not a legend. Bigfoot is a people, ancient, intelligent, patient beyond anything in our experience of what patience means. We walked into their home with weapons and drugs, and the arrogance of a species that has never been convincingly told no. We took one of their family and put him in a cage in an underground facility, and they decided, with perfect clarity and no apparent hurry, that the appropriate response was not violence. It was something we are far less equipped to endure than violence. It was justice, delivered slowly, personally, without end. I still check my perimeter every night, last thing before sleep. Every morning, first thing before I let myself believe the day is ordinary. The sensors I've installed are the best available. The protocols I follow are the ones I was trained to use in the most hostile surveillance environments on Earth. And every single morning, without exception, I walk out to that dock and I ask myself the same question. Not whether they're out there. I know they're out there. The question I ask is simpler and harder than that. It's whether the life I am living now, this careful, monitored, contained half-existence, is the punishment they intended, or just the beginning of it. Another story waits in the darkness, just like this one, where the things we refuse to believe in are already watching from the shadows. Stay on the world behind midnight, and keep your perimeter tight.